An Arab billionaire purchases a single mother at an auction with the intent of her bearing his child, but a subsequent discovery leaves him profoundly shocked. Before we commence with the story, please let us know in the comments from which city you are watching. We hope you enjoy this tale. Lila, a young woman burdened by innumerable hardships, was raising her son, Aman, alone. With no other viable options, she made the desperate decision to participate in an unconventional auction, a disturbing event where women were treated like commodities, their companionship acquired by wealthy and powerful men. For Lila, this wasn't a choice born of desire, but her sole remaining chance for survival. Seated in a secluded corner of the opulent hall, Lila felt the crushing weight of the decisions that had led her to this precipice. Her heart pounded erratically, each beat a frantic rhythm of fear and profound uncertainty about what awaited her. Yet her thoughts continually drifted to her son, Aman, who was currently under the care of her elderly neighbor. The mountain of overdue bills, the ever-present threat of eviction, and the numerous nights Aman had gone to bed hungry had collectively driven her to make this unthinkable, desperate decision. The event organizer, a man clad in an impeccable suit, his smile forced and insincere, approached her to deliver instructions. "Remember, Lila," he began, his voice low and conspiratorial, "maintain your composure, smile, and do not look directly at the guests." He then walked away, leaving her to her anxieties. The hall was filled with men in elegant attire, their gazes appraising each woman as if they were priceless works of art on display. Lila felt a lump form in her throat as her name was called. "Lot number 23, the organizer announced, his voice theatrical and carefully calculated. Lila's legs trembled as she ascended the steps to the brightly lit stage. The intense lights momentarily blinded her, and the heat from the spotlights brought beads of sweat to her forehead. She tried to keep her head held high but could feel the predatory gazes fixed upon her. "A true exotic beauty," the organizer continued, employing adjectives that made Lila feel even more exposed and vulnerable. A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. Suddenly, a deep, commanding voice cut through the room. $1 million! The hall fell into complete silence. All eyes turned toward a man with tanned skin and piercing, intelligent eyes seated in the last row. He exuded an undeniable aura of power and authority. Karim Al-Fayed, an Arab magnate renowned for his immense wealth and guarded discretion, had made his bid. The organizer, visibly surprised by the substantial opening sum, repeated the amount for confirmation. No other bids followed. "Sold," he announced, a satisfied smile playing on his lips. Lila felt her legs weaken, but she managed to maintain her composure as she stepped off the stage. Her life had just changed irrevocably. Karim approached her, his gaze serious and unreadable. "We need to discuss the terms," he said calmly, extending his hand to guide her. Lila hesitated, but ultimately followed him to a private room where the fate she had just sealed on that stage would be officially determined. The room was spacious and elegantly furnished. Karim gestured toward an armchair, indicating for Lila to sit. He walked over to a nearby table and picked up an envelope that had been placed there beforehand. "Here is the contract," he said, handing it to Lila. "Read it carefully." Lila took the document, her hands trembling. The silence in the room was deafening as she began to read the first few clauses. Her breathing grew heavier, more labored, as she reached the main section. "You want me to have a child and leave it with you?" she asked, her voice shaking with disbelief and dawning horror. Karim crossed his arms and nodded, his expression unyielding. "I require an heir. After the child is born, you will leave. The contract makes that unequivocally clear." Lila stood up abruptly, a wave of indignation and profound fear washing over her. "I can't do this. I won't abandon my own child." Karim's eyes narrowed, but his voice remained steady, devoid of emotion. Lila stared at the contract, her hands shaking with a mixture of anger and despair. She thought of Aman, her son, and the immense sacrifice she was making in an attempt to secure his future. Tears threatened to fall, but she fiercely held them back. "This isn't right," she murmured, sinking back into the chair. Karim leaned in, his gaze intense. "What's right or wrong is irrelevant here. What matters is that you honor the agreement." Lila knew she had no viable alternative. With a heavy heart, a heart filled with sorrow and resignation, she picked up the pen and signed the contract. Kareem took the document and said, "Very well. Tomorrow morning we will conduct the necessary medical examinations, and then you will be taken to my mansion. Get some rest." He left the room, leaving Lila alone with her swirling thoughts and profound regrets. She looked at her signature on the contract, feeling as though she had just sealed her own fate. The next day, a sleek limousine awaited Layla in front of the small, rundown apartment where she lived. Saying goodbye to Ammon had been brief and excruciatingly painful. She had told him she needed to work far away for a few months, promising to call whenever she possibly could. The child, innocent and entirely unaware of the true circumstances, waved with a confident smile, oblivious to the profound anguish his mother was enduring. The journey to the mansion was silent. Lila stared out the window, watching the arid desert landscape gradually give way to modern, luxurious structures. When they finally arrived, the sheer grandeur of the property left her speechless. Tall, imposing iron gates opened to reveal immaculate, sprawling gardens, and a mansion that seemed to have materialized straight out of a fairy tale. Kareem was waiting at the entrance, his expression as serious and unreadable as ever. He guided her inside, briefly explaining the layout of the rooms and the house rules. "Your privacy will be respected," he stated, "but I expect you to fulfill your part of the agreement without question." He then left her in the care of a staff member named Amira. Amira, a kind-faced, middle-aged woman, showed Lila to her room. The space was furnished with elegant decor and decorated in soft, muted tones, a stark, almost jarring contrast to the simplicity of her previous life. On the bed lay a selection of clothes and accessories, evidently chosen for her. "If you need anything at all, I'll be nearby," Amira said with a warm, reassuring smile. Lila thanked her, but couldn't shake the persistent, unsettling feeling of being a stranger in this opulent, unfamiliar place. That night, as she gazed at the distant horizon from her room's balcony, her thoughts inevitably turned to a man. The pain of being separated from him was suffocating, a constant ache in her chest, but she had to cling to the belief that she was doing what was best, what was necessary to secure his future. A soft knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. It was Kareem. "Tomorrow we will visit my trusted doctor," he informed her curtly before leaving. Lila nodded silently, the weight of her decision growing heavier with each passing moment. But she knew with a grim certainty that there was no turning back now. The next morning, Lila awoke early. The profound silence of the mansion was more unsettling than comforting. Her first night there had been sleepless, filled with incessant racing thoughts about what lay ahead. The bed was incredibly soft, the sheets made of silk, but the crushing weight of her reality made peace impossible to find. Soon Amira knocked on the door to escort her to Kareem's doctor. The journey through the mansion itself was a disorienting experience, marked by its evident, almost overwhelming luxury. Hallways adorned with priceless Persian rugs, walls hung with paintings by renowned artists, and vast windows showcasing meticulously maintained, verdant gardens. Leela barely had time to absorb it all before stepping into the limousine that would take them to the clinic. The doctor's office was situated in a modern, gleaming building in the heart of Dubai. Dr. Ibrahim, a man with a calm demeanor and a reassuring voice, greeted Layla professionally. After a series of thorough examinations, he declared that everything was in perfect condition to begin the first fertilization process. Lila nodded silently, trying to mask her profound unease. Kareem remained distant throughout the procedure, observing from afar with his usual composed, impassive posture. For him, this was merely another calculated step toward fulfilling his familial responsibilities. But for Lila, it was a painful, visceral reminder that at the end of those 9 months, she would face the unimaginable heartbreak of leaving behind a piece of herself. Back at the mansion, if Kareem's wealth knew no bounds. There was a library with floor-to-ceiling shelves filled with ancient tomes, an indoor pool surrounded by majestic marble columns, and a music room filled with rare and exotic instruments. Despite its undeniable splendor, the mansion felt empty, almost soulless. Layla noticed that although Kareem lived surrounded by such breathtaking beauty, his life seemed marked by a deep, pervasive loneliness. He rarely smiled, and his few acts of courtesy were invariably cold and calculated. In the first few days, Kareem limited his interactions with Layla strictly to practical matters. He ensured everything was in line with the terms of their contract, but never attempted to build any sort of personal connection. Lila, on the other hand, felt increasingly out of place, like an ill-fitting cog in a well-oiled machine. She spent her nights staring at the ornate ceiling, wondering how her son was doing, and her mornings trying to come to terms with the stark fact that soon she would carry a child she couldn't call her own. In the second week, Kareem hosted a formal dinner at the mansion for some important business associates. Lila was instructed to dress elegantly and accompany Kareem, as stipulated in their agreement. The dress she wore was undeniably stunning, but her steps were uncertain as she descended the grand staircase into the hall. The guests observed her with undisguised curiosity. Some greeted her politely, while others exchanged knowing glances that made her feel exposed and judged. Kareem, however, remained by her side the entire time, introducing her simply as my special guest. "Are you okay?" he asked in a rare moment of apparent concern, as they stepped aside to a quieter corner of the bustling room. "I'm trying to adjust," Lila replied honestly. Kareem nodded, but said nothing more. For him, social events were a mere formality, an extension of his business obligations. For Lila, however, it was a jarring plunge into a world she didn't fully understand, a world where she felt like an imposter. After the dinner, Lila went up to her room exhausted. Before sleeping, she called her neighbor to check on a man. Her son's cheerful, innocent voice comforted her, but also brought fresh tears to her eyes. She felt an overwhelming longing, a desperate ache to hold him, but she knew she couldn't give in to the temptation to turn back. As the days passed, Lila began to notice small, almost imperceptible details about Kareem that seemed to contradict his consistently rigid exterior. He was meticulous and demanding, certainly, but he also displayed brief, fleeting moments of an underlying humanity. One afternoon, she found him in the garden, personally tending to a rare, exotic plant that seemed to hold special significance for him. "This plant belonged to my mother," he explained, noticing Lila's curiosity. "She used to say that caring for it brought her peace." Lila felt a pang of empathy. For the first time, Kareem seemed less like an imposing, unapproachable figure, and more like a man trying to cope with his own private pain. She began to realize that although their motivations for entering into this arrangement differed vastly, both of them carried heavy, unspoken burdens. Amira, the housekeeper, also began to open up more to Lila during the long, quiet afternoons at the mansion. She shared stories about Kareem's life, recounting how he had been forced to take on immense responsibilities at a very young age after the untimely death of his parents. These conversations helped Lila to better understand the complex man who, until then, had seemed utterly impenetrable. Even so, the loneliness lingered. Layla consciously avoided growing attached to the mansion or to Kareem, constantly reminding herself that her time there was strictly limited. Yet amidst the pervasive isolation, she found solace in her solitary walks through the magnificent gardens and the quiet nights spent stargazing from the privacy of her balcony. One evening, Kareem knocked on her door. He seemed less rigid than usual, his expression slightly softened. "We need to talk," he said, entering her room. Lila sat down, expecting more instructions or perhaps demands regarding their agreement. Instead, Kareem appeared somewhat uncertain, as if searching for the right words. "I know this arrangement is difficult for you," he began. "I don't intend to make it any harder. I just want you to know that despite everything, I respect your courage." Lila was taken aback. Kareem's words were unexpectedly kind, and for the first time, she saw something in his eyes she had. After he left, Lila found herself reflecting on their conversation for a long time. For the first time since arriving at the imposing mansion, she felt there might be a possibility, however distant and improbable, of discovering something deeper, something more human, in their strange and unconventional relationship. The days at the mansion continued at a slow, measured pace, but each passing moment seemed to add a new layer of complexity to the dynamic between Lila and Kareem. They were like two disparate puzzle pieces, slowly, cautiously, trying to find a way to fit together amidst the highly unusual circumstances that had brought them into each other's orbits. Lila knew that time was relentlessly marching forward and that soon she would be carrying Kareem's child. This stark reality terrified her, yet it also stirred a growing, undeniable curiosity. Who was this enigmatic man who had asked her to make such a profound, life-altering sacrifice? Life at the mansion gradually began to follow a more predictable rhythm. Lila, though still struggling with the immense weight of her decision, started to notice small, subtle details about the house and her new, albeit temporary, routine. The expansive garden became her sanctuary, a place where she could feel the warmth of the sun on her skin and listen to the soothing, melodic sound of water flowing through the ornate fountains. She noticed that Kareem also spent a considerable amount of time in the gardens. He didn't go out of his way to initiate conversations, but Layla could tell he was observing her, his gaze often following her every move. There was a subtle, unspoken tension in the air, something both of them recognized but tacitly chose not to address directly. One afternoon, while walking through the garden, Lila noticed Kareem meticulously pruning a large ancient tree. When he sensed her presence, he glanced up briefly before returning to his task, making it clear he wasn't expecting or inviting a conversation. "Do you enjoy gardening?" Lila ventured, breaking the comfortable silence. "It helps me organize my thoughts," Kareem replied without looking at her. Lila sensed a small opening in his reserved response. He was guarded, certainly, but perhaps not entirely unapproachable. She decided to respect his space, but couldn't ignore her growing curiosity about the intricate layers of complexity behind his consistently rigid facade. That evening during dinner, Kareem surprised Lila by joining her at the table. Until then, her meals had been solitary affairs, served by Amira in the privacy of her room or a quiet, secluded corner of the vast house. He seemed calm, yet his presence carried a weight, an unspoken significance that Lila couldn't overlook. "Are you adjusting?" he asked, breaking the silence as he poured himself a glass of wine. "I think so. As much as one can, under these circumstances," Lila replied, trying to keep her voice steady and composed. Kareem studied her for a moment, as if attempting to read her thoughts, to decipher the emotions hidden beneath her carefully maintained exterior. "I know it's not easy, but I hope you understand that all of this is necessary." Lila wanted to ask, necessary for whom? But prudently kept the thought to herself. Instead, she simply nodded and continued eating in silence. There was something in the way he spoke, a certain inflection that suggested beneath his imposing, authoritative demeanor, he carried an emotional burden he meticulously concealed from the world. As the weeks passed, Lila began noticing small, almost imperceptible acts of kindness from Kareem. He was consistently discreet, yet undeniably thoughtful. One day after she had casually mentioned missing certain foods from her homeland, Amira brought a tray laden with dishes prepared especially for her. "Mr. Kareem asked me to make these for you," Amira explained with a warm smile. Lila was surprised but said nothing. It was becoming increasingly difficult to decipher Kareem's true intentions. On one hand, he remained cold and distant. On the other, he seemed to genuinely care about her well-being, albeit in subtle, indirect ways. One morning, Lila found a collection of books neatly arranged on her bedside table. Among them were novels and collections of stories she had mentioned enjoying during a casual, passing conversation. She couldn't help but feel a warmth spread through her chest, realizing that Kareem actually paid attention to such small, seemingly insignificant details. A defining moment occurred when Lila approached the mansion's music room. The door was slightly ajar, and soft, melancholic piano notes echoed down the hallway. Curious, she stepped inside and saw Kareem playing with a skill and sensitivity she never would have expected from him. "You play piano?" she asked, surprised. Kareem looked up, clearly startled to have been caught in such an intimate, private moment. "My mother taught me when I was a child," he said, pulling his hands away from the keyboard. "It's beautiful," Lila remarked, stepping closer. He averted his gaze as if unsure how to respond to a compliment. In that brief, unguarded moment, Lila saw that beneath all his layers of rigidity and control, there was someone with a deep, poignant, emotional connection to his past. On another occasion, Lila was in the garden when a small bird fell from a branch, clearly injured. Without hesitation, she knelt and gently picked up the fragile creature. Kareem appeared shortly after, watching her with an expression of curiosity. "What will you do with it?" he asked. "I'll take care of it until it's strong enough to fly again," Lila replied with quiet conviction. Kareem remained silent, but there was something in his eyes that suggested admiration. That simple, instinctive act of compassion seemed to touch him in an unexpected way. The nights in the mansion were often lonely, but Layla found a measure of comfort in the small routines she developed. She enjoyed wandering the silent corridors, marveling at the grandeur of the architecture. One evening, she crossed paths with Kareem in the hallway. He looked tired, his features softer, less guarded than usual. "Can't sleep?" he asked. Lila hesitated before replying, "Sometimes it's hard with so much on my mind." Kareem nodded, as though he understood completely. To her surprise, he invited her to have tea in the library. Seated among shelves filled with ancient, leather-bound books, they talked for longer than they ever had before. In that moment, Lila realized she was beginning to see beyond Kareem's carefully constructed mask. The household staff also noticed the subtle but significant changes. Amira, who had always been kind, now seemed closer to Lila, treating her with a warmth that bordered on friendship. Even Kareem appeared more at ease in her presence, though he still maintained his characteristic formality. There was something different in the way he looked at her, as if he was beginning to see her in a new, more nuanced light. Lila, in turn, began to feel less isolated. Despite the inherent nature of their contract, she found herself discovering small moments of genuine connection and meaning in the seemingly empty, cavernous mansion. Yet the stark reality of her situation still loomed over her, like a persistent, ominous shadow. Each day she reminded herself that all of this was temporary. As the first signs of change in their dynamic emerged, Leela knew she needed to prepare herself for the inevitable challenges ahead. Kareem was a complex, multifaceted man, and she was only just beginning to understand the intricate layers of his personality. Deep down, she knew their individual journeys were only just starting to intertwine on a deeper, more significant level. The days continued to pass, and Lila found herself increasingly immersed in the unique rhythm of life within the mansion. Despite her conscious efforts to maintain emotional distance, small shared moments with Kareem began to leave a lasting impression on her. He, in turn, displayed a growing, albeit still restrained, interest in getting to know her better, beyond the confines of their contractual arrangement. "I see in them the future," he replied, "something that needs to be nurtured with love and responsibility." That experience deeply moved Lila, who began to realize that Kareem possessed layers of complexity she had yet to uncover. Meta commentary section, rewritten slightly. Let's play a little game with those who only read the comments. Type McDonald's in the comments. Only those who've made it this far will understand. Now let's continue the story. Over time, small gestures continued to bring them closer. Kareem began asking more about Lila's personal likes and interests, and she, in turn, found subtle ways to show appreciation for his attentiveness. Their conversations in the garden became a regular occurrence, as did their quiet evenings spent in the library, where they would share books and discuss the stories they contained. During one of those nights, Kareem asked a question that caught her somewhat off guard. "If you could change anything about your past, what would it be?" Leela remained silent for a few moments, reflecting. "I think," she said thoughtfully, "I would have chosen more wisely whom to trust. But at the same time, I'm not sure I'd change everything. Without the wrong choices, I wouldn't have Aman." Her son's name hung in the air between them, like a tangible, poignant shadow. Kareem sensed the weight of her words and gently shifted the conversation, giving her space. Despite their growing connection, Lila still felt a persistent sense of uncertainty. She knew the contract between them was a formidable barrier, one that couldn't be easily ignored. No matter how much she was beginning to like Kareem, the thought that their time together was strictly limited to 9 months lingered constantly in her mind. One night, as Lila gazed at the stars from her balcony, Kareem joined her. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, simply contemplating the vast, starlit sky. "You think a lot about the future, don't you?" he asked, breaking the quiet. "I can't help it," Lila admitted. "All of this, it feels so temporary." Kareem turned to her, and for a brief, charged moment, his eyes met hers with an intensity that made her hold her breath. The future can be built, Layla. It all depends on how we choose to handle the present. Lila felt a warmth she couldn't quite explain emanating from those words. Although he hadn't spoken directly or made any explicit promises, there was an implicit assurance in his tone, something that made her believe, however tentatively, that destiny might still be unwritten. The staff at the mansion began to notice the palpable change in atmosphere. The coldness that once seemed to fill the grand estate had been replaced by a lighter, almost welcoming vibe. Amira, in particular, was pleased to see how Kareem seemed less isolated, more open and engaged. Lila also noticed significant changes within herself. For the first time in months, she felt she was reconnecting with a part of herself she thought she had lost forever. Even so, Lila knew she was approaching a critical crossroads. She was fully aware that the feelings developing between her and Kareem could complicate matters even further. But for now, she chose to embrace the present, even though the future remained shrouded in uncertainty. Dawn brought a soft, ethereal light to the mansion, but Lila felt a familiar restlessness stirring within her. The bond forming between her and Kareem was something she hadn't anticipated, and the weight of the secret about Aman grew heavier with each passing day. The possibility of Kareem discovering the truth terrified her, yet keeping it hidden was becoming increasingly unbearable. After breakfast, Lila decided to walk through the gardens, hoping to clear her mind. She tried to lose herself among the vibrant flowers and ancient trees, but her fragile peace was soon interrupted when she heard Amira calling her name urgently. Lila hurried back to the mansion and found Kareem in the living room, holding a photograph. His expression was difficult to read, a mixture of emotions she couldn't decipher. "Who is this boy?" he asked, his voice controlled but laden with an unmistakable tension. Lila froze. The photo in his hands was of Aman, one of the few precious mementos she had brought with her. She had hidden it carefully, but somehow Kareem had found it. "He's my son," Lila admitted, her voice trembling. The silence that followed was suffocating, stretching out for what felt like an eternity. Kareem walked slowly toward her, his dark, piercing eyes locked on hers. "You lied to me," he said, his voice low but sharp with accusation. "Why didn't you tell me from the very start?" Lila felt tears welling up but forced herself to keep her head high, to meet his gaze. "I was afraid it would complicate everything, afraid you'd think I wasn't suitable for the contract." Kareem crossed his arms, still scrutinizing her. "And why did you agree to this, knowing you would have to leave another child behind?" The question hit Lila like a physical blow. She took a deep, shaky breath before answering. "I did it for him, for the bills, the overdue rent, the nights he went to bed hungry. I had no other choice." Her words were filled with raw emotion, and Kareem remained silent for a long moment, as though processing everything he had just heard. Finally, he turned and walked to the window, gazing out at the meticulously manicured horizon. "You should have trusted me," he said, his voice tinged with a disappointment that cut Lila deeply. She couldn't hold back her tears any longer. She knew this moment, this revelation, could shatter the fragile connection they were building, but she also knew she could no longer hide the truth. Later that night, Kareem asked Lila to join him in the library. The room was dimly lit by the soft, flickering glow of a lamp, creating an atmosphere that was both intimate and undeniably tense. Kareem sat in his usual armchair, a folder of documents resting on the table in front of him. "I've reviewed the terms of our contract," he began bluntly. "There's nothing in it that explicitly mentions the possibility of you keeping secrets of this magnitude. However, it also doesn't address how to handle the unique situation we now find ourselves in." Lila felt a wave of panic wash over her. "Please, don't send me away. I'll fulfill my part of the agreement, I promise." Kareem raised a hand, gesturing for her to stop. "I'm not suggesting that, but trust is essential, Lila, and now we need to rebuild it." He opened the folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper, sliding it across the table toward her so she could read it. "I want you to see Aman. You are permitted to visit him, but on one condition. He cannot know the truth about our arrangement. Not yet." Lila blinked, stunned. Kareem's unexpected generosity caught her completely off guard. but it also brought a fresh, sharp wave of guilt. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Kareem sighed, folding his hands on the table. "Because I know what it's like to grow up without answers. I want your son to have at least part of your presence in his life, even if it's only temporary." Those words carried a depth of pain Lila hadn't anticipated. For the first time, she felt she was beginning to truly understand the reasons behind Kareem's often rigid, unyielding demeanor. He wasn't just a man seeking an heir, he was also someone carrying deep, unhealed scars from his own past. The next day, Leela was taken to visit Aman. The journey was long, but each passing mile brought her closer to her son. When she finally arrived, emotions overwhelmed her. Aman ran into her arms the moment he saw her, and Lila held him tightly, as if she never wanted to let him go. "Mommy, you're back!" he exclaimed, his voice filled with pure, unadulterated joy. Lila smiled, but her heart felt heavy. She knew this visit was only temporary, a fleeting reprieve, and that soon she would have to leave him again. They spent the day together, playing and laughing, much as they had in the old days. But as night began to fall, Lila felt the familiar weight of their impending goodbye. When the moment came, a man hugged her tightly, asking when she would return. "Soon, my love," she promised, even though she knew how uncertain, how hollow that word truly was. Back at the mansion, Lila was both physically and emotionally drained. Kareem was waiting for her in the living room, his expression calm, almost serene. "How is he?" he asked, his voice laced with a genuine concern that surprised her. Lila sank into the sofa across from him, feeling completely vulnerable. "He's well, happy, but it's so hard to leave him." Kareem nodded, as if he understood perfectly. He said nothing more, but his gaze conveyed something that words couldn't express, a silent acknowledgement of her pain. In the days that followed, the dynamic between them shifted perceptibly. A quiet understanding, a mutual respect that hadn't existed before, began to take root. Kareem became more considerate, more attuned to her emotional state, and Lila, in turn, began to trust him more, to let down her guard, however slightly. Small gestures, like sharing a meal in comfortable silence or chatting during a leisurely walk in the gardens, became meaningful moments of connection. One evening, as they sat in the library, Kareem revealed something Lila hadn't expected. "My mother died when I was very young," he said, his voice low and somber. "My father was always distant, completely focused on his business. I grew up with immense responsibilities long before I even understood what they truly meant." Lila watched him closely, realizing he was sharing something deeply personal, something he likely hadn't shared with many. "That must have been incredibly difficult," she said sincerely. "It was, but I think it shaped who I am today. And no matter how hard I try, I can't shake the feeling that something will always be missing." Lila felt an urge to comfort him, to offer some solace, but knew Kareem still kept certain emotional barriers firmly in place. Even so, that moment of uncharacteristic vulnerability brought them closer together. As the months passed, their relationship continued to evolve. What had initially been a cold, transactional agreement was now marked by mutual respect and a growing admiration. Lila began to see Kareem not just as a powerful, enigmatic man, but as someone capable of profound humanity, of deep, hidden kindness. Kareem, in turn, saw in Lila a strength and compassion he hadn't anticipated, qualities that increasingly drew him to her. Still, they both knew that time was relentlessly passing, and that they would soon have to confront the uncertain, daunting future that awaited them. The days following Lila's visit to Amen brought a strange, almost surreal calm to the valley. Zrenia, and long, quiet nights spent stargazing from the solitude of her balcony. Despite these moments of respite, the thought of her son, Aman, never left her. The sound of his innocent voice, his cheerful laughter, continued to echo in her mind, a poignant reminder of what she stood to lose. One morning, while having her coffee, Lila was surprised by Kareem's arrival. He seemed more relaxed than usual, and there was something almost friendly, almost approachable in his expression. "I want you to come with me today," he said, breaking the comfortable silence. Lila looked at him, intrigued. "Where to?" she asked. "I have a meeting at one of my family's more remote properties. It's a quiet, secluded place, and I think you'll like it." She hesitated for a moment but eventually agreed. Any opportunity to leave the confines of the mansion, however briefly, was welcome. The car ride was quiet but not uncomfortable. Kareem drove calmly, his focus on the road, while Lila watched the scenery change as they left the bustling city center behind. After nearly an hour, they arrived at a secluded property nestled amidst rolling sand dunes. The place was incredibly peaceful, with a small, charming house built in traditional Arabic style. This place was my mother's retreat, Kareem explained as they stepped out of the car. She used to come here whenever she needed peace, a sanctuary from the demands of our life. Lila followed Kareem to the house, admiring its understated simplicity and rustic charm. Unlike the overwhelming grandeur of the mansion, everything here felt more inviting, more human scale. The walls were adorned with colorful, hand-woven rugs and antique lanterns, and the air was filled with the subtle, pleasant scent of aromatic herbs. Kareem led her to a shaded terrace overlooking the vast, silent desert. The silence was absolute, broken only by the soft, whispering sound of the wind. Lila sat in one of the weathered wooden chairs, feeling more at ease, more herself than she had in weeks. "This is the only place where I can think clearly," Kareem confessed as he sat beside her. "It's beautiful," Lila replied, gazing out at the breathtaking, endless horizon. Kareem remained silent for a few moments before asking, "Do you miss your home?" Lila sighed, reflecting on her life before all of this upheaval. "I miss what it represented. A simple place, perhaps, but full of memories, full of love." Kareem nodded, seeming to understand. There was something deeply comforting about that shared moment, a connection that didn't require words, a silent acknowledgement of their individual longings. After the visit to the desert property, the relationship between Kareem and Lila became even more natural, less strained. He started involving her in more aspects of his life, such as meetings with the mansion staff and decisions about the daily routine. For Lila, it was an opportunity to better understand the complex man behind the carefully constructed facade of a ruthless, unapproachable businessman. One evening during dinner, Kareem brought up an unexpected topic. "I've been thinking about making some renovations to the mansion," he said casually. "Something to make it feel more welcoming." Lila raised her eyebrows, surprised. "And what do you have in mind?" "I want to create a space where a family could feel at home," Kareem replied, averting his gaze. Lila felt her heart tighten. It was the first time he had explicitly mentioned the possibility of a future that included more than just their contractual obligations. However, she knew there was still much to resolve, many obstacles to overcome, before such a vision could potentially become a reality. One afternoon, as Lila walked through the gardens, she found Amira carrying a tray with tea and cookies. The housekeeper seemed radiant, her usual kind smile even brighter. Lila couldn't help but comment, "You seem especially cheerful today, Amira. Did something happen?" Amira smiled, her eyes sparkling. "It's just nice to see how things are changing around here. The mansion has never felt so full of life." Lila felt her face flush slightly but didn't respond. She knew Amira was referring to the shifting, evolving dynamic between her and Kareem. As uncertain as she still felt about the future, it was undeniable that something new, something unexpected, was blossoming between them. As the days passed, Lila began to notice that Kareem was changing too, subtly yet significantly. He spent more time with her. In one of those deeply personal conversations, Kareem revealed something that profoundly touched Lila. "I never truly knew how to cope with losing my mother," he confessed, his voice heavy with an emotion he rarely displayed. "She was the anchor of our family. When she was gone, everything fell apart." Lila felt a wave of empathy wash over her. She knew what it was like to lose someone important, albeit in different circumstances. That shared moment of vulnerability, of raw honesty, created an even stronger, more resonant bond between them. Despite their growing closeness, Lila knew the contract remained a formidable, unyielding barrier. As much as she was growing attached to Kareem, developing feelings she hadn't anticipated, the stark reality of their situation couldn't be ignored. She spent countless sleepless nights wondering about the future, trying to reconcile her burgeoning emotions with her contractual responsibilities and her deep love for her son. One night, Kareem knocked on her door, asking to talk. He seemed unsettled, as if grappling with something important, something he couldn't quite articulate. I know we have our limitations, he began, sitting in the chair across from Lila's bed, but I want you to know that I'm trying to understand what all of this means, for both of us. Leila felt her heart race. There was something in his words, a certain inflection, that hinted at a significant, perhaps pivotal, shift in his perspective. I'm trying too, she replied honestly. Kareem nodded, seeming relieved to hear her say that. Despite the lingering uncertainties, the unspoken questions that hung in the air between them, both were willing to face whatever came next, together. The mansion staff began to notice the palpable impact of these changes. Amira, ever observant, remarked how Kareem seemed lighter, more human, less burdened by the immense weight of his responsibilities. Even the other employees commented on how Lila's presence had transformed the once cold and impersonal atmosphere of the grand estate. Lila, for her part, felt more at home, more herself, despite the ever-present weight of the contract. She started seeing the mansion as more than just a temporary stop, a gilded cage. It was becoming a place where she was building something, something real, even if she wasn't yet sure what it would ultimately become. At the end of each day, as she gazed at the stars from her balcony, Lila knew she was approaching a critical turning point. The bond forming between her and Kareem was something she hadn't planned for, something she hadn't anticipated, but now it felt almost inevitable. Both were changing, evolving, and the journey they had started together, under such unconventional and challenging circumstances, was beginning to take a shape neither of them could have predicted. The days at the mansion continued to pass, but something undeniable, something powerful, lingered in the air. Lila and Kareem's connection was deepening, growing stronger with each shared glance, each quiet conversation. Small gestures, lingering glances, and extended meaningful conversations hinted that the rigid boundaries of their initial contract were being subtly yet significantly challenged. Yet Lila knew, with a certainty that gnawed at her, that every moment they shared, every step closer they took, was leading her toward a critical, perhaps painful juncture. One morning, as Kareem reviewed documents in his office, Lila walked in carrying a tray with coffee. He looked up, clearly surprised by her initiative, but said nothing as she set the tray on his desk. I thought you could use a break, she said, trying to sound casual, to mask the nervousness she felt. Kareem studied her for a moment before replying, Thank you. Lately, it's been difficult to stay focused. Lila hesitated before sitting in the chair opposite him. Something with the business? He shook his head. Number just a lot to process. The silence that followed was heavy but not uncomfortable. Both seemed to be weighing the unspoken words, the unacknowledged emotions, and that hung in the air between them. Lila finally broke the silence, and Lila, in turn, began to understand better the immense pressures and responsibilities he carried on a daily basis. During a lavish charity dinner, Kareem introduced Lila as his companion. The other guests exchanged curious, speculative glances, but Kareem appeared indifferent to their scrutiny. To him, the opinions of others were largely irrelevant. Lila, however, felt uneasy, almost exposed, under the weight of so much focused attention. Are you okay? Kareem asked, leading her to a quieter, more secluded corner of the grand ballroom. I'm getting used to it, Lila replied, forcing a smile. Kareem briefly held her hand, a gesture that surprised her, but also offered a small measure of comfort. Don't worry, I'm here with you. Those simple yet meaningful words filled Lila with an inexplicable warmth, a sense of security she hadn't felt in a very long time. Their moments of intimacy, of shared vulnerability, became more frequent. Lila noticed that Kareem was opening up more, sharing details about his life, his past, that had previously been hidden, locked away. He spoke about his childhood, his family's immense expectations, and the constant, relentless pressure of maintaining the Al-Fayed legacy. In return, Lila shared stories of her own life, about the struggles of raising Aman alone, and the small, precious moments of joy she found amidst the pervasive challenges. Kareem listened attentively, revealing a more human, more receptive side of himself, a side that Lila found herself increasingly drawn to. One night as they walked through the moonlit gardens, Kareem stopped abruptly. "Lila," he began, his voice serious, "I want you to know that despite everything, you've shown me things I'd never noticed before." Lila looked at him, surprised. "Like what?" "That there's more to life than just obligations and contracts. That sometimes you need to make room for something new, something unexpected." Lila felt her heart race. She knew she was falling for Kareem, deeply and irrevocably, but she also knew, with a chilling certainty, that the contract remained an unyielding, formidable barrier between them. The mansion staff began to notice the undeniable change in their dynamic. Amira, ever observant, started treating Lila with even more warmth, almost as if she already saw her as a permanent, integral part of the household. Other staff members exchanged knowing smiles whenever they saw Kareem and Lila together, sensing the unspoken connection that was blossoming between them. Despite these positive developments, Lila couldn't ignore the persistent weight of reality. With each passing day, the end of their contract loomed closer, a stark reminder of the precariousness of her situation. The fear of losing everything she was beginning to cherish, including the profound bond she had built with Kareem, gnawed at her constantly. One afternoon, as Lila was reading in the library, Kareem entered with a somber, uncharacteristically troubled expression. "We need to talk," he said, closing the door behind him. Lila set her book aside, sensing the tension in the air, the gravity of his demeanor. "What's going on?" Kareem sat across from her, clasping his hands together on the polished surface of the table. "We need to discuss the future. I know the contract outlines precisely what should happen after the baby's born, but things have changed." Lila held her breath. She had known this moment would come, this inevitable confrontation with the terms of their agreement, but she still wasn't prepared for it. "What do you mean by that?" she asked, her voice hesitant, betraying her inner turmoil. "I want to consider other options," Kareem stated firmly, his gaze unwavering. "I don't want you to just leave." Lila's heart raced, a wild, hopeful flutter in her chest, but she didn't know how to respond. What he was suggesting was exactly what she had secretly, desperately hoped for. Yet the fear of allowing herself to fully embrace that hope, of raising her expectations only to have them dashed, held her back. "And what does that mean?" she finally asked, her voice barely a whisper. "It means we need to find a way to make this work. Together." Those words echoed in Lila's mind, a beacon of fragile possibility in the overwhelming darkness of her uncertainty. She knew the situation was incredibly complicated, fraught with potential pitfalls and heartbreak. But for the first time in a very long while, she felt a genuine spark of hope. In the days that followed, Lila and Kareem began speaking more openly, more honestly, about their fears, their desires, and their expectations for the future. Both knew they were grappling with feelings far beyond what something he had long since dismissed as an unattainable dream. Even so, they still faced significant challenges. Kareem remained haunted by his family's deeply ingrained expectations, the immense weight of tradition and legacy. Lila, on the other hand, struggled to fully accept that her life, her future, would never be the same, that she might actually find happiness in this most unexpected of circumstances. But together, they found strength in each other, a shared resolve to navigate the complexities of their situation. On a quiet evening, as they watched the stars from the terrace, their familiar sanctuary, Kareem turned to Lila and said something she would never forget. "I didn't know." The next day, Kareem asked Lila to join him on a trip to the desert. They left early, and soon the vast, golden expanse of sand stretched out before them like an endless, undulating ocean. When they arrived at a secluded, hidden oasis, Kareem explained that this was a special place for him, a personal retreat he visited whenever he needed clarity, a moment of quiet contemplation. "This place reminds me," he said, as they walked along the edge of the crystal clear water, "that even in the middle of the most barren desert, there is life, there is hope." Lila felt deeply connected to that moment, sensing it was a turning point, a pivotal moment in their shared journey. They sat together under the cool shade of a solitary palm tree, and Kareem began speaking again, his voice filled with a raw honesty she had never heard from him before. I've spent so much of my life trapped by the past, by the expectations of others, that I've never truly allowed myself the chance to figure out what I truly want. Lila looked at him, feeling the profound sincerity in his words. "And what do you want now?" she asked, her heart pounding in her chest. Kareem turned to her, his eyes shining brightly under the intense desert sunlight. "I want to live differently. I want to build something real, something meaningful, something not defined by contracts or obligations, but by genuine connection." Lila felt tears threatening to fall but managed to hold them back. Those words were everything she had secretly, desperately hoped to hear. Yet a sliver of uncertainty, a residue of past hurts, still lingered between them. When they returned to the mansion, the atmosphere between them felt lighter, less burdened, but both knew there were still unresolved issues, unspoken questions that needed to be addressed. Lila spent her nights reflecting on her choices, on the profound impact all of this would have on her son, Aman. She knew that to truly move forward, she would need to confront her own pain, to set aside her deeply ingrained fears. One night, while gazing at the star-strewn sky from the solitude of her balcony, Kareem joined her, carrying 2 cups of steaming tea. He handed one to Lila and stood beside her in comfortable silence for a few moments. "You know, Lila," he began, his voice low and contemplative, "I never thought I'd meet someone who would make me question everything I believed, everything I thought I knew." She looked at him, feeling the profound weight of his words. "You've shown me that it's possible to have more, that there's room for something beyond just responsibilities and expectations." Lila gave a faint, wistful smile, her eyes filled with a complex mixture of emotions. "You've also shown me," she replied, her voice soft but firm, "that it's possible to find strength, true strength, in the midst of profound pain. I wouldn't have come this far without you." In the days that followed, Kareem began taking concrete, tangible steps to change the dynamic between them. He reviewed their initial contract and, while the clauses regarding the child's future remained, he made it unequivocally clear that he wanted to find a solution that would be fair, truly fair, to both of them. Lila felt a mixture of relief and lingering apprehension. She knew there were still significant challenges ahead, but she also sensed, with a growing certainty, that they were finally moving in the right direction. Let's play a little game for those who only read the comments. Type Coca-Cola in the comments. Only those who've made it this far will understand. Now let's get back to the story. The mansion staff, particularly Amira, noticed the profound changes. Kareem's usual coldness, his almost impenetrable reserve, had given way to a warmer, more approachable demeanor. Leila, too, seemed more confident, more at ease within the opulent, often intimidating walls of the grand estate. One afternoon, Amira, ever observant, remarked to Lila, "I always knew Mr. Kareem had a good heart. He just needed someone to help him find it." Lila smiled, feeling a wave of gratitude wash over her for everything that had transpired, for the unexpected turns her life had taken. Despite the positive changes, Lila knew the future was still uncertain. She and Kareem would have to continue facing their fears, navigating their complex emotions, and working together to build something lasting, something real. But for the first time, she felt a genuine sense of hope, a burgeoning belief that love, in its most unexpected forms, could indeed overcome even the most daunting challenges. As the sun set once again over the magnificent mansion, Lila and Kareem sat together on the terrace, watching the horizon, both knowing the road ahead would be difficult, but both equally determined to face it side by side. The atmosphere within the mansion had undergone a visible transformation. The initial, palpable tension had been replaced by a lighter, more relaxed mood, yet the profound weight of their shared future still hung over Lila and Kareem. They both understood they were at a critical crossroads, and difficult, life-altering decisions would soon need to be made. One morning, Kareem summoned Lila to his office for a conversation. The room, usually so imposing and formal, felt more intimate on that particular occasion. He gestured for her to sit, and Lila felt a familiar mixture of curiosity and apprehension. "I've been thinking a great deal," he began, his voice steady but imbued with a depth of emotion she hadn't often heard, "about our agreement, and about everything that has transpired since you arrived here. Lila kept her gaze fixed on him, waiting. When we first made this contract, Kareem continued, clasping his hands together on the polished surface of his desk, my focus was singular, ensuring an heir for my family. But things have changed, profoundly. Lila's heart raced. This was something she had longed to hear, a confirmation of the unspoken connection that had grown between them. Yet she also feared what might come next. "And what does that mean?" she asked softly, her voice barely a whisper. "It means I want to find a way to make this work. For both of us. I want you to stay. Not as part of a contract, not out of obligation, but because we choose to be together." Kareem's words felt like a fragile glimmer of hope in the vast darkness of her uncertainty. But Lila knew, with a painful clarity, that it wouldn't be that simple. There were so many layers to their situation, so many potential complications. That afternoon, as she walked through the sun-dappled gardens, Lila reflected on what Kareem had said. As much as she felt a powerful, undeniable connection to him, the reality of their circumstances remained harsh, unforgiving. Her son Aman was in another city, and their initial contract had unequivocally stipulated that she would leave after the baby was born. Later, Lila found Amira tending to some flowering plants near the central fountain and decided to open up, to share some of her burden. "Amira," she began, her voice tinged with uncertainty, "do you think I can truly trust Kareem?" Amira looked up, surprised by the directness of the question, but responded with sincere conviction. "Mr. Kareem is a man of his word, Lila. He never makes promises he doesn't intend to keep. But he is also human. And like you, he is trying to find a balance between what he feels in his heart and what he believes he needs to do." Lila absorbed those words, feeling slightly more at ease, though still deeply conflicted. The next day, Kareem invited Lila to visit an orphanage he supported, an endeavor he had undertaken before, but this time, the visit carried a different, more personal significance. Upon their arrival, the children greeted them with uninhibited laughter and warm hugs. Lila felt a wave of warmth wash over her as she watched Kareem interact with them. His usual seriousness, his almost stern demeanor, gave way to a gentler, more caring side, a side she was seeing more and more often. "You truly care about them," Lila remarked as they watched the children play. "They remind me," Kareem replied, looking at her with a newfound intensity, "that life is about more than just responsibilities in business. There is beauty in simplicity, in genuine connection." Those words resonated deeply with Lila. For the first time, she felt that Kareem was truly ready to change, to relinquish some of the tight control he valued so highly in exchange for something more authentic, more meaningful. Back at the mansion, Kareem made the momentous decision to revise their contract. He gathered his team of lawyers and meticulously adjusted several key clauses, ensuring that Lila would have more freedom, more agency, and, crucially, the right to maintain contact with Aman after their baby was born. When he presented the changes to Lila, she was visibly moved, her eyes filling with tears. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, holding the amended contract with trembling hands. "Because I want you to know that you're not alone in this. I don't want you to feel trapped or obligated. I want you to stay." The suggestion caught Lila completely off guard. She remained silent for a few moments, processing what he had just said. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice hesitant. "Absolutely. He's a part of you, and I want to know every part of your life." Lila felt her heart warm. Kareem's willingness to include a man in their lives, to embrace that crucial aspect of her identity, was a clear, undeniable sign of his commitment to building something real, something lasting, with her. The trip to visit Aman was filled with a mixture of nervous anticipation and profound hope. Kareem appeared outwardly calm, but Lila knew, from the subtle tension in his jaw, that he was nervous too. When they arrived, a man ran into Lila's arms, hugging her tightly. "Mommy!" he exclaimed joyfully, his small face alight with happiness. Kareem watched the tender scene with a soft, almost wistful smile. When Lila introduced Aman to him, the boy looked at Kareem with wide, curious eyes. "Are you my mom's friend?" Aman asked innocently. Kareem knelt to meet the boy's eye level and replied, his voice gentle. "Yes, I am. And I hope we can be friends too. Aman smiled shyly and nodded, and Lila felt a profound sense of relief and burgeoning happiness. The interaction between the two was natural, unforced, as if Aman could intuitively sense that Kareem was a safe, kind presence in their lives. Back at the mansion, Lila began to feel that, for the first time in what felt like an eternity, she was truly building something solid, something meaningful. Her relationship with Kareem was no longer based solely on the cold, impersonal terms of their contract, but on a foundation of trust, mutual respect, and genuine, burgeoning feelings. Yet she knew the road ahead would still require immense courage and unwavering patience. One evening, as they gazed at the stars together from the terrace, their shared sanctuary, Kareem held Lila's hand and said, "I know we still have a lot to face, many challenges to overcome, but I want you to know, with absolute certainty, that I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make this work." Lila felt her heart fill with hope. For the first time, she truly believed that a future together, a future filled with love and happiness, was not just a distant dream, but a tangible possibility. Life at the Al Fayed mansion was becoming increasingly familiar, almost comfortable for Lila. But the bond between her and Kareem was still developing, still evolving, still deepening with each passing day. After the visit with Aman, something fundamental had shifted. Kareem seemed more attentive, more present, more attuned to her emotional needs, as if he was finally beginning to grasp the true depth, the profound complexity of the life Lila had led before stepping into his world. One morning, as they had coffee together on the sun-drenched terrace, Kareem made an unexpected, almost startling suggestion. "I want Aman to live here," he said, his voice calm yet imbued with a quiet, resolute determination. Lila's eyes widened in surprise. "Are you serious?" she asked, still trying to process the magnitude of his idea. "Yes, if we are truly going to build something together, a real life, a real family, I want him to be part of it. From the very beginning." Leela's heart raced. The thought of having her son close, of not being separated from him, was everything she had ever hoped for. But doubts, born of past hurts and present uncertainties, still lingered. "And what about the contract?" she questioned hesitantly, the ghost of their initial agreement still casting a long shadow. Kareem took a deep breath before responding. "The contract doesn't have to be a barrier. We can adjust the terms, amend them, to ensure Aman has a rightful place here, without compromising anything, without creating any further complications." Lila remained silent, deeply moved by Kareem's profound willingness to adapt his life, his world, for her, for them. It was a gesture that spoke louder, more eloquently than any words possibly could. Preparations for a man's arrival began almost immediately. Kareem instructed Amira to prepare a room for him, decorated with elements Lila suggested. Kareem, who had been observing from a slight distance, approached slowly. He knelt to Aman's level and extended his hand. "Welcome, Aman. I hope you'll like it here." The boy shook his hand with a shy smile. "Thank you, sir." Kareem smiled, and Lila noticed that even in his characteristic seriousness, there was a genuine, heartfelt effort to connect with Aman. The first few days were a period of adjustment and exciting discoveries. Aman quickly adapted to the luxurious environment of the mansion, exploring every corner with boundless energy and asking curious questions about everything he saw. Kareem, though still somewhat reserved, showed remarkable patience and genuine interest, answering each of Aman's questions calmly and thoughtfully. One night, as Lila tucked Aman into bed, he asked, "Mom, is Mr. Kareem a good man?" Lila was surprised by the directness of the question, but answered honestly, "He is, sweetie. He's learning to be better every single day." Aman smiled, seemingly satisfied with her answer, and soon drifted off to sleep. Leela sat by his side, watching his peaceful, innocent face. For the first time in a very long while, she felt like she was truly on the right path, moving towards a future filled with genuine happiness and lasting peace. Over time, Kareem and Aman began to form a genuine, heartwarming bond. They spent afternoons playing chess, a game Kareem patiently taught the boy, or walking together in the expansive, sun-dappled gardens. Kareem, who had once seemed so distant, so unapproachable, revealed a more relaxed, more caring side of himself, a side that Lila found herself increasingly drawn to. During one of their leisurely walks, Aman suddenly stopped and looked up at Kareem, his small face serious. "Do you like my mom?" he asked with the innocent, disarming curiosity of a child. Kareem chuckled, surprised by Aman's frankness. "I do," he replied sincerely, his gaze meeting Lila's. The drive to the hospital was tense, fraught with a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. Kareem, usually so composed, so in control, couldn't hide his worry. He gripped Lila's hand tightly, whispering words of encouragement, his gaze fixed on her with anxious, loving eyes. "Everything will be fine, Lila. I'm here with you," he repeated, his voice a lifeline in the overwhelming storm of her labor. Upon their arrival, the medical team took over, their movements swift and efficient. But Kareem refused to leave Lila's side. He stayed with her throughout the entire labor, holding her hand, offering words of comfort, encouraging her every step of the way. Hours later, the sound of a baby's cry, strong and clear, filled the room. Kareem looked up, his eyes wide as the doctor placed a tiny, perfect boy in his arms. His heart overflowed with an emotion so profound, so overwhelming, it left him momentarily speechless. "He's beautiful, Lila. Perfect," he said, his voice thick with unshed tears as he looked at her, his eyes shining with a love that encompassed her, their son, and the incredible journey that had brought them to this moment. Lila smiled, exhausted but overjoyed. It was a moment that marked not an ending, but the true beginning of a new, extraordinary chapter in their lives. A few days after the birth, Lila was resting in their bedroom, their newborn son cradled in her arms when Kareem entered, holding an envelope. He sat beside her, his expression serious, yet his eyes shone with a tender, loving light. "Lila, I want you to know something," Kareem began as he opened the envelope. "This contract," he paused, looking directly at her, "no longer holds any value." Before her surprised, disbelieving eyes, Kareem tore the document into small pieces, letting them flutter to the floor. "Everything I've done so far, every decision I've made has been for you and for our family. I don't want anything, not even a piece of paper, to define our future." Kareem then took Lila's hands in his, and with a gaze full of profound love and unwavering commitment, knelt before her. "Lila," he said, his voice filled with emotion, "you've brought light into my life. You've taught me what true love is, what it means to have a real family. I want to spend the rest of my life by your side, raising our children and facing whatever comes together." He opened a small velvet box, revealing a delicate ring with a diamond that softly reflected the warm lamplight. "Will you marry me?" Tears streamed down Lila's face, her heart racing with a joy so intense, so overwhelming, she could barely speak. "Yes, Kareem. Yes, I will." Aman, who had been peeking curiously through the slightly ajar door, ran toward them and hugged them tightly. "We're going to be a real family," he exclaimed, his small face beaming with happiness. Kareem lifted the boy into his arms, and together the three of them celebrated the beautiful, poignant moment that marked the true beginning of a new, extraordinary chapter in their lives. The months leading up to the wedding were filled with joy, excitement, and meticulous preparations. Lila envisioned a ceremony that would reflect her cultural roots as well as the profound love they had built together, and Kareem made sure to fulfill her every wish, to make her every dream a reality. The grand mansion transformed into a fairy tale setting, adorned with exotic, fragrant flowers, delicate, twinkling lights, and intricate details that beautifully blended both Arabic and Western traditions. Finally, the big day arrived. The sun shone brightly, illuminating the lush garden where the ceremony would take place. Lila looked stunning, radiant, in a flowing white dress accented with delicate golden embroidery. Amon, dressed in a small, impeccably tailored formal suit, proudly carried the rings, his small face beaming with importance. As Lila walked down the aisle, Kareem's eyes filled with emotion. He watched her with an adoration, a profound love that seemed to envelop her, as if seeing her, truly seeing her, for the very first time. "You look breathtaking," he whispered, taking her hands in his. Their vows were simple yet deeply meaningful, spoken from the heart. They promised love, respect, and unwavering partnership, sealing their commitment with a tender, heartfelt kiss that drew warm, heartfelt applause from their assembled guests. The reception was a vibrant, joyous celebration of cultures, of love, of new beginnings. Traditional Arabic music blended seamlessly with soulful melodies from Lila's homeland, creating a festive, warm, and inviting atmosphere. Aman ran around the grand hall, thrilled with his new baby brother and the beautiful new life they were all building together. "This is the start of everything I've ever dreamed of," Lila said, her voice filled with emotion as she watched the joyous scene beside Kareem. "And it's only the beginning," he replied, holding her hand tightly, his eyes shining with a love that promised forever. By the end of the night, under a canopy of brilliant, twinkling desert stars, Kareem and Lila danced together, surrounded by their family and friends, celebrating a love that had overcome every barrier, every obstacle, every doubt. It was the perfect, beautiful ending to a journey that had begun so unexpectedly, so unconventionally, but had blossomed, against all odds, into a story of true, enduring love. While Aman played contentedly with their new baby, Kareem and Lila exchanged glances that promised to face the future, whatever it may hold, together, united, their love a constant, guiding star. They knew, with a certainty that resonated deep within their souls, that they had everything they truly needed: love, unity, and a family that would continue to grow, to flourish, to thrive. And so, under the shining, benevolent desert stars, their extraordinary story reached its perfect, poignant conclusion. A new beginning, filled with boundless hope, unconditional love, and enduring happiness. What do you think? Did Lila make the right decision by forgiving Kareem and choosing to marry him? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd also love for you to rate this story from 0 to 10. What score would you give it? Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell to stay updated with all our stories. And make sure to check out more heartwarming stories by clicking here on the end screen.